We're going to start with a legend from the southwestern part of this island, the area that's known as Ka'u. Right? So, Ikawa Kahiko, Mamua o Kapenekuki. And once upon a time, long before Captain Cook, there lived a man named Kanikoa. And at this time in the story, he was very, very unhappy. Because he didn't used to be unhappy. So he was not normally an unhappy man, but because of things that had happened recently, he was very upset, very unhappy. For a long time, he and his young wife had lived very happily together. He had his own home, he had a garden, they would work together in the garden, they'd produce abundance of food, sweet potatoes and taro and bananas and all the things necessary. He would fish as well, so everything went along very well. And then one day, the in-laws came, the parents of his wife, and from that time on, things got worse. At first, Kanikoa would do everything he could. He worked harder. He, planted more crops. He caught more fish. But the mother, especially, was never satisfied. She kept wanting more poi. She kept wanting more fish. She kept wanting more sweet potatoes, more of this and more of that. They already had everything they needed. He just couldn't understand her because she kept asking for more, and if you had too much food, it was going to spoil. There was no way to preserve it. But she kept doing that. And then, the worst part, not only that, but she kept calling him lazy because he wouldn't keep doing more and more and more. And so he'd call him lazy and shiftless and good for nothing and constantly down on him all the time. Finally, it got so bad that they actually drove him out of the house. Took both parents to do that. Now, the wife in all this, he didn't blame her. She was young already, and she was very easily under this terrible domination of her mother in particular. So, she didn't know what to do. They said that they wanted to kick him out, and they wanted her to marry a new husband. So now he's out of his home, sitting under a kukui tree, practically weeping because of all the terrible things that had happened. And suddenly he hears a voice. And a stranger is standing in front of him. And the stranger says, "My friend, you look so unhappy. Why are you so upset?" So then he says, well, he told the whole story. He had no intention of doing that. Okay? I mean, he wasn't going to just go around spreading all, because he was ashamed being driven out of his own house. But somehow with this particular guy, he just found himself telling the whole story about how they'd acted and what he tried to do and how they kicked him out and all of that. And this was a very kind-faced stranger, and he laughed. But when he laughed, he wasn't laughing at Kanikoa. He was laughing in a way that made it sound as if all his troubles would be over soon. So he says, "Look, there's no problem. You come with me to my cave, and I'll give you work to do." So Kanikoa follows him, and they go through this lush garden, and they come to a cave where the stranger lived, and the stranger says, "Okay, here's what'll happen." He says, "I'll go fishing. First, together we will pull kalo. I'll tell you about that in a moment." He said, "Then you'll prepare the imu, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. He said, "Then you'll pound poi, and I'll tell you about that." Okay, because not everybody's familiar with these things, and yet these were very important to the old Hawaiian culture. So, taro, this is like, think of this in parentheses now, okay? Taro is a primary food source, was a primary food source in old Hawaii. Today, there's a lot of Hawaiians who still like it, but it was major. It was like wheat in Europe, it was like potatoes in Ireland. It was the main starch, okay? Main energy source. So it grew in irrigated terraces, like rice paddies. And the water would sit there, and the taro would grow in this little pool of water. okay, these square rice paddies, okay? Mostly square. When it was pulled out of the mud, when it was ripe, it looked pretty much like a great big potato. Could be a little smaller, could be about like that, but it was sort of roundish. Okay? Now, the emu was an underground oven. They would dig it, kind of a trench, a short trench, about maybe a meter or 3 feet deep. And then they'd line the bottom with hot stones that they had heated in boiling. They had these baskets, and they'd boil, that would hold water. The woven baskets, very tight, and they would hold water, and they'd put stones in them and boil the water. And then the hot stones they'd line on the bottom, then they'd put banana stalks, then they'd put the food wrapped up in special leaves called tea leaves, not the tea, drinking tea, a different kind. And then they'd put more banana stalks, and then they'd cover that with dirt and let it bake. So actually it was like steam baking. And when it was all thoroughly cooked, they'd carefully take it out, try not to get any dirt in it, in the food, and then they'd take it out. Now the taro itself, they would cut that up into pieces and put that on a long board, more like a tray. Okay? And then there would be the man, it was a man's job, almost everywhere. They had a tool called well, actually, it looked exactly like this. It's called a poi pounder. Right? This thing down here. And it was heavy, it was made of stone. And then the man would pound it and mash it and then mix it with water. And this was a way that they had of kind of like extending the food. So they would pound it and mash it, came out like a thin mashed potatoes. And that's called poi. And some people think it's delicious. Okay? Some people think it tastes like library paste. Well, I can remember library paste as a kid, and it doesn't really taste like that. Okay? But it is unusual, and you kind of has to grow on you. But anyway, that's the emu, and that's the preparation of poi. Okay? Now, when now we're back to Kanikoa and the stranger, and they ate, and they had poi, and they had fish, and these were primary meals. And when they finished, there was still a lot of food left over. So the stranger says to Kanikoa, he said, go down to the trail, and if you meet any travelers, ask them to come up here and share the food. Well, this pleased Kanikoa because he was by nature a generous man. And so he went down to the trail, and every time there was a traveler, he'd invite them up, and they'd come and they'd share food until that day's food was gone. So this happened day after day after day, and Kanikoa got so involved in the work, in the preparation of the food, in eating with the travelers, that he forgot his own sorrows. Right? Until one day, a traveler came who had been a former neighbor. And he told Kanikoa that the parents were planning something. They had gotten a young wrestler, and they were going to bring him to this cave, and they were going to have the wrestler kill Kanikoa so the wrestler could marry the daughter. Well, Kanikoa wasn't a fighter, and so he got very afraid. And he thought he was going to have to leave. Okay, so he went to the stranger. He says, "I'm sorry, I can't stay anymore." And the stranger says, "I know what's happening," because he knew the thoughts that Kanikoa was having. And he said, "All right, don't you worry about it. What we'll do is, when they come, and if that wrestler attacks you, then what you do is you climb in the tree that's in front of the cave, and it'll protect you." Well, Kanikoa was very confused because he'd been living there quite a while, and there wasn't any tree in front of the cave. But this man had an air about him that was not one that you wanted to question. Okay? It wasn't a fearful one at all. It was just, you trusted him. So he says, okay. So he's there working, and here come the parents with the wrestler. And the wrestler, when we say a wrestler, they didn't only wrestle. They were almost like street fighters. And so this guy was carrying a club, and he intended to really bash up Kanikoa. So he comes rushing at Kanikoa with his club. Kanikoa jumps into the tree, and it feels like the branches are surrounding him and protecting him. Okay? And here comes the wrestler, and as he comes up, and then even the parents are coming up, trying to get him out of the tree, from the tree comes all these voices, hundreds of voices that sound like they're coming from everywhere. And it's saying, here we are, here we are, here we are. And whoa, they just beat it out of there as fast as they could go. Suddenly, Kanikoa finds himself standing up. He's no longer in a tree. The stranger is next to him, and the stranger's smiling and pointing at the others who are running away with the wrestler in front. Okay? And so, this felt kind of wonderful. So they went back to their work and back to the thing that they were doing. And until, again, what happened was more travelers started coming. And a lot more travelers started coming. Because what happened was that a drought came to Ka'u. And all the gardens were drying up except this garden in front of the stranger's cave. And so travelers were constantly coming, and Kanikoa was told, go out and invite them all in. We've got plenty of food. And so they were feeding the travelers. So finally one day, here comes his wife and her parents. And so they come and they say, okay, please, the mother especially, she says, you've always been such a good boy. Won't you give us some food now? Now the stranger had already told Kanikoa, they're going to come. And when they come, you feed your wife and drive the others away. Kanikoa says, I can't do that. I mean, if they're hungry, I can't just drive them away. So the stranger says, okay, I'll take care of that. So here they are. His wife is there, very thin and pale. So he takes his wife by the hand, brings her into the cave where the food was to eat, and the parents try to follow. And just as they get up, there's suddenly a tree in front of the cave. And each time they try to go in the cave, the branches are batting them away. So finally they were just driven away and had to go home. And so when the wife was finished, she went home with the parents. She still felt this obligation. And every day they came, and the wife got fed, and the parents were driven away. Until, the wife was getting more and more friendly and more happy and more plump and rosy and healthy. And so they would then, Kanikoa and his wife would spend hours, happy hours together. She was no longer going back to the parents. So they didn't come again for a long time. The drought was on. So finally, what happened was that they came crawling. I mean, they were thin, they were wasted, and they say, please, please give us something to eat. And Kanikoa wanted to, of course. That was his way. And Kanikoa said, the stranger said, no. Go away, don't bother this couple anymore. And Kanikoa said, but they're so hungry. And the stranger says, okay, I understand. You go after them and feed them, but they won't go to your house anymore. So he did that, and the parents left, went back wherever they came from. Kanikoa then went back, and there was this abundance of food from his garden. And finally, the stranger had left. Kanikoa and his wife had gone back to their own property. Their garden grew beautifully and wonderfully, and they were able to feed people. And it became known that they fed people, they took care of the sick, they took care of the lost and the homeless, and people could come from anywhere to them. And they said, what they said to people was, ours is the God of love. He helped us and then left us to do his work. Pipihola ke ka'au, and so goes the story. Okay. Now, what we do when we finish the legend is we start discussing the primary topic in relation to the legend, because the legend was about this topic too. The topic today is how to mend a broken heart. Now, really strange stuff, or different stuff. All of it won't be strange. But let's understand, first of all, what it means, what we mean by a broken heart. Okay? Why do we use that? Why do we talk about the heart as a center of pain and pleasure? And what's so different about this organ? Okay? Well, the heart itself is just an organ of the body. It's a big muscle. I mean, some of you might not even have known that, but that's what it is. It's just a muscle. And it's made out of the same tissue as your biceps. You can't see my big biceps right now because of my shirt. Okay? But we don't go around talking about broken biceps. Right? We talk about a broken heart. What we find all around the world is some way of describing emotions, especially those of sadness and happiness, as being located somewhere inside the body. Now, in the Western cultures, it's land languages. It's the heart, which is usually considered the center, because it's in this area. Although the actual sensations that people experience when they have broken heart feelings cover this entire area here, not just that one little organ. Okay. And in Hawaiian, just to give you an example, the words that would have been used in the old days for the same concept, okay, I'm heartbroken, or I have pain, or I have sadness in my heart, and the words in Hawaiian would have been na'au, which means intestines. It would have been opu, which means stomach, okay, or it would have been loko, which means, it's a general word meaning inside oneself, in this case, okay? So, but still there's that idea that it's inside, it's someplace inside where these feelings are from. The reason this is important is because when we have a negative relationship, and especially a situation with sadness or sorrow, our bodies are reacting at the same time. And they're reacting by tensing up muscles. And the reason the body tenses up the muscles is to try and resist the painful awareness of the situation. Okay? When we're talking about sadness and sorrow. Okay? It doesn't feel good. And so the body tries to tense up, it tenses up the muscles. And the stronger the resistance, the stronger the resistance to the experience, the stronger the tension. The stronger the tension, the worse we feel. To the point of actual physical pain. So sometimes when people are talking about a broken heart, it feels like something there hurts so much it's broken. And that's because of this extreme tension. Right? Now, the reason it's felt mostly in the chest area is partly cultural and partly physiological. So I'm going to explain the physiological part. You'll find out this is very useful. What happens is we have chest muscles, and they tense up. We have a thymus gland right in the center. Under any kind of stress, it contracts. And the reason it contracts is because it's surrounded by muscle tissue. And so this can produce sometimes even a pain going right straight down here. Okay? And then under that we have the lungs. And then the lungs, they're not big sacs. What they are is tiny, tiny little sacs, each one of the sacs bound by muscle tissue. And so all of that tenses up. And of course that gives us the added bad effect of shallow breathing. Okay? And then we have the heart, which is more in the center. And of course it's a muscle, and it can tense up. And then we have problems with circulation and getting rid of lymph and all the physiological stuff. But all of these different kinds of things tense up in these experiences of sadness and sorrow. By contrast, when these muscles release, we feel happiness, we feel goodness, we feel flow, we feel expansion. If there's a lot of tension and a lot of release, we can feel joy, fantastic, and connection with things. The more tension we have in here, the more separated we feel. Okay? And that adds to the problems of the whole experience. So now I'm going to give you an unusual idea to consider. For those of you who came in a little late, the topic is how to mend a broken heart. That's why we're talking about all this. So the way to mend a broken heart, from the point of view I'm giving you now, is to do anything that relieves the tension in your muscles, particularly the ones in the front of the whole heart area, the chest area. Okay? Doesn't matter what it is, as long as the effect is to relieve the tension here. The muscles I've mentioned, of course, but any others that might be involved in the situation. You know, we can have a lot of muscles involved in whatever happened. Right? Of course, we're most interested in ways and means that provide a more lasting, a substantial finish to this problem and a more lasting relief. Okay? Because a lot of people do some short-term things that could also be useful. I mean, there's no sense being in pain if you don't have to, even from the emotions. So massage is useful on a short-term basis. And some people go to distractions. And, amusements, having the TV on all the time, always doing something to keep their mind off of things that have happened or how they feel. But that's short-term. Those two things can be good for first aid, but they don't heal anything. Okay? If your person is aware enough, they can use massage. And if they're aware enough, they could even consciously use distraction for healing, but most people don't do that. They're trying to use it to escape from the feelings. So I'm going to give you a list of healing techniques. These techniques provide substantial and long-term or even permanent relief from the broken heart syndrome, let's call it. We can call it a syndrome because there's all kinds of parts to it. Okay? All right. Some of these are going to be easier to use than others for you, the individual in particular. Some of them may be more attractive than others. Some of them you may think sound so strange you don't want to have anything to do with them. But I'm telling you, they all work for somebody. And sometimes also you might want to combine one and one. There's no rule that says you can only use one thing at a time. So anyway, here they are. Let's talk first about the mental approach. Now, the way I'm describing that now, we find some way to reinterpret, to reframe, a popular word, a lot of people know what it means now, or to reorganize our thoughts about the situation. For instance, some broken-hearted feelings are sustained and even amplified by the words we use to describe what happened. And when we keep repeating those words, they keep reinforcing and amplifying how we feel. Like we use words like betrayed, unforgivable, hurt, loss. All of these things, if these are what we use in our own descriptions when we're talking to ourselves or we're talking to somebody else, they have that effect of bringing it back and bringing it back and bringing it back. Right? And you can't get healed that way. So one of the mental approaches would be to pay attention, listen to yourself. How are you describing what happened? Finding the words that produce an emotional reaction and dropping them from the experience. So I've worked with people like this, and it can come out something like this. We call it a skinny description. Okay? My girlfriend betrayed me, and I felt so hurt, and I felt like I'd lost everything good in my life. Well, my girlfriend left me, and I didn't like that, and I didn't like how I felt. That's true. We haven't changed the truth at all. But changing how you describe it can produce an amazing amount of relief, as simple as that sounds. So exploring how you describe it to yourself or others and seeing whether you can still be true but drop what we call loaded words, okay? The emotional words. Okay, that's a mental approach. There's another approach, we can call it the forgiveness approach. Now, why forgiveness? Well, not forgiveness because we're hurt. Many times when we are hurt emotionally, we feel that. Why? There's also a layer or more of anger about that. So some part of us is angry at the person, or angry that it happened, or angry at some aspect of it. That's what needs forgiveness. And we're not just talking about the word, we're talking about actual forgiveness. And I can tell you a little bit about that right now. But people can be angry when they have sadness and sorrow about what they're angry about is the behavior of the other person. And one interesting thing is that they can even be angry about the behavior of someone who has passed away. That's what makes them angry. Okay? And so here's where forgiveness is really, really important and useful. Forgiveness, true forgiveness, has occurred when we can remember the situation and no longer feel bad about it. That's when we know forgiveness has happened. Okay? So there are no magic words that make that happen. It's got to be a change of attitude and a change of reaction. There's so many ways to go about doing this, and I can't tell you all of them, but I will tell you simply that a lot of them have been presented in my books and my articles and in the books and articles of a lot of other people. There's a lot of excellent information out there in the world nowadays about how to forgive. And so if that is one that appeals more to you, then there's a lot of resources that you can look at, okay, and gain by. Right? Let's talk about another one. Let's talk about the high purpose approach. Now, in the high purpose approach, in this one, in the story, Kanikoa's heart was healed mostly by engaging himself in work that he loved, work that he knew how to do well, and work that he considered worthy. The worthy part was more than just the production of food, but the sharing of food. And he became so involved in that the other things then were less important. This is the key. The high purpose approach works when you can start doing something that you consider more important than the event that made you feel so unhappy. Then a healing happens, and the heart begins to heal. Okay? You'll find that, they say time heals all wounds. Well, not all of them, but time is one of the factors that, because memories start to get less vivid as long as you don't keep reinforcing them. And as they get less vivid, as you're involved in something good and worthy, then the healing happens over time. And it's no longer an issue. Okay? The next one is the present moment approach. Now, bad memories are a terrible place to live. The more time we spend with them, the worse we feel. And we're feeling bad about things that don't even exist anymore. I mean, really, truly, don't exist anymore. In fact, let me give you a little thumb, we can go to a place and we said, oh, that's where this bad thing happened, or this person left me, or something like that. Not really. I'm going to give you a little science here. The Earth is moving, turning at 1,000 miles an hour toward the sun. Not only is it doing that, it's going at an incredible rate of speed around the sun. And not only that, but the sun is moving. So anything that happened in the past is way, way back someplace. Okay? It's nowhere near here. And the whole point here really is to get you to start thinking a little differently about the past. And that's what this present moment approach is. And it's learning how to live more and more in the present. Because if we keep living in the past, keep our mind on those things, we start getting disconnected with the goodness around us. And we start, not only that, but we start also not seeing opportunities for growth for the future. We just become blind to all that when we get locked into what happened then. So coming back more into the present, and people say, well, how do you do that? It's the simplest thing in the world. It's the most simple thing. Our bodies are designed for this, actually. You get in the present moment by paying more attention to sight, sound, and touch, primarily. You can also use movement or anything else, activity, but the point is you get involved in the sensory present. That's what brings you here. Then the mind begins to follow. Right? And then the feelings follow. And then you're here where 99% of the time the bad things aren't happening. Okay? So getting back into here, it's not good to try and live in the present only. I know people who try that. And a lot of them end up making the present moment this particular hour, or maybe this particular day only, and don't even think about tomorrow. Okay? Don't think about yesterday, don't think about tomorrow, and lock themselves really into another trap. And this is the same kind of thing. There is the extended present that exists as well. And some of these people will they won't listen to the news, they won't read papers, they don't want to hear anything bad. That's something like a living death after a while. Again, it blocks out the goodness, blocks out opportunities. Being in the present, and of course, only refusing to look at the bad things. And I tell people this sometimes because this is primarily, I'm representing an organization of healers. And if you don't look at the bad things that are happening, you don't have anything to heal. Okay? And that's the point. Oh, this is happening over here. Well, send some thoughts, send some prayers, write a check for a donation to help the people who are helping the people. Do something when you encounter stuff that isn't working in the world. That's still in the present moment in a healthy way, okay? Not in one that limits you. Okay? So when you're fully in the present, really engaged, the past ceases to exist, the future opens up, and your heart heals. Okay? Just by doing that. Next, we'll talk about the love approach. When we talk about the love approach, this one has two parts. There's the, oops. Okay. The love approach has the personal part and the social part. Okay. So, when we're talking about the personal part of love, we're talking about self-esteem. This is how you feel about yourself. Because the worse you feel about yourself as a person, the more criticism you have about yourself and your behavior and your possibilities and everything you've done, the worse you're going to feel when there's a breakup or a loss or something happens that hurts your heart, the worse you're going to feel if your self-esteem is low. And on the contrast, the curious thing is, the better you feel about yourself, the faster your heart heals. Right? It's like you recover from that. Yes, okay, that was a bad experience, but, I can handle it. I'm okay. I'm worth it. The heart heals faster. Not always immediately, I'll tell you, but it heals faster. The better you feel about yourself. Now, once this involves, part of the first part involves self-forgiveness, because so often guilt is involved, and people blame themselves for the breakup that hurts themselves so much. Okay? So you can't control another person's thoughts, feelings, or behavior. You can influence them, if you know how, but you can't control them. And so when we are trying to blame ourselves for everything the other person did, that's nonsense. Okay? You're not that powerful. I'm sorry, I hate to tell you that. Okay? But the other counterside is you can forgive yourself. And we go back to that forgiveness process, finding some way that works for you to do that. And once you've established enough self-forgiveness, then you can go on to building self-esteem even more. And this is done by positive self-acknowledgement, acknowledging who you are and what you can do and what you're capable of and good things that you do and have done. Self-appreciation along the same lines, and if you're really brave, self-admiration. Now, we're not talking about you comparing yourself to others in order to build yourself up, putting others down to put yourself up. That doesn't work. That's a mask, and that's phony. Okay? If you really feel good about yourself, you feel good about yourself. It doesn't matter what anybody else thinks, how good they are, what they do at all. If you can reach that kind of state, boy, you're going to have an awful lot more happy moments, believe me. Okay? But that comes from that self-acknowledgement, self-appreciation, and a proper, I don't like that word, a true self-admiration, when you're actually admiring what is actually good. Okay? Now, the social part has to do with the person or persons involved in this situation, the other people. It can be applied to anybody else with good effect, but here, all you have to do for this part is to acknowledge, appreciate, and admire anything good about the other person that you can think of, right? No matter what they did. I can remember giving a workshop on this many years ago in Texas. Some of you may have heard this before, but I was teaching about this, the importance of it. And after the workshop, a woman came up to me, and she was a very feisty, very outspoken woman. And she started telling me about this neighbor of hers that she was having trouble with. And she said, and that woman has very pretty shoes. Right? Well, great, that was wonderful. She got it. But that's the kind of thing it takes, okay, to use this approach. Okay? Find something good. And when you can do that, you'll find the things you don't like having less power, less effect, until after a while they don't matter at all. Okay? And one of the reasons this happens is because every time you criticize someone else, your muscles tense up. Your muscles tense up. And every time you compliment somebody else, your muscles relax. And so it's a form of self-healing. Right? And so it feels good. And so you'll start learning how to do it more and more and more because it feels so good and it works so well. And it heals broken hearts. Then we have the personal power approach. In this story, we brought this up before, but Kanikoa's healing began when he got fully engaged in doing something he knew how to do well. Okay, that's when it started. This was self-confidence based on skill. This is the most powerful kind of power, of personal power there is. It's self-confidence based on skill. And trying to compare yourself to the skills of others depletes your personal power. So you don't want to do that. That's a waste of time. You are skilled at whatever level you are skilled at whatever you are doing, and that's a fact. And feeling good about that is what gives you the self-confidence to do more things, to expand that, to use it in different areas, and to learn new skills. But it's the skill development that's part of the personal power approach. Because the more skilled you get, the more self-confidence you have, the faster your heart heals under any circumstances. Okay? It all goes in together. Now, the last one I want to talk about here, that I put someplace, there it is. This is called the be willing to try anything approach. Because we have a saying that says there's always another way to do anything. Well, there's always another way to heal a broken heart. Right? We don't really know how we're going to respond to any particular approach until we try it. And different people respond to different things differently. So, exercise will work for some people. Acupuncture will work for other people. Right? A change of diet or a change of location can work for other people. Right? There's all kinds of possible things that can work. If you want to try a really different technique, and it's really fast, it's what we call an instant healing technique. It's not in the big book, but it's in the little blue book that I welcome all of you to take. It's called Dynamite, the Dynamite technique. And it's an extremely simple thing, and boy, can it heal broken hearts so fast to make your head spin. That's why some people are uncomfortable with it. Okay? It happens too fast. But it's one of these be willing to try anything techniques. And the information is available to you up there. Yes?
Well, one of the initial stage of the broken heart, after a breakup, can be so devastating.
Yes.
You can't even get out sometimes. But you can't be happy at work. So maybe you get fired.
Sure.
Or just a syndrome.
That's right. It is devastating at first.
And then maybe a pattern also, as a secondary thing, maybe a pattern that gets established. For some reason, we end up needing more of these experiences, following that.
If a pattern
Can't get out of it.
I'll tell you why. What happens when we have such an experience and then we start having a sequence of such experiences? What we're getting is a reflection of how we feel about ourselves. And if we feel, for instance, some people fall into the trap of feeling unworthy because they weren't good enough for this person. Therefore, they must not be good enough for this. So they weren't good enough for that job, and therefore they must not be good enough for any job. And this is one of the things that keeps people at that. And let me tell you, folks, you don't have to believe this, but your emotions are going out through the atmosphere. And people and animals pick up on them. And there will be some people, because of these emotions, there will be some people who will like you no matter how you feel. No matter how you think about yourself, they'll like you anyway. There'll be some people who won't like you no matter what you do. Okay? You can really get yourself into the most wonderful, positive, exciting, skillful state imaginable, and they still won't like you. Okay? Unfortunately, once in a while, that's parents, too. Okay? There will be some people who will like you depending on what you do. And part of your behavior is your emotional behavior. And there will be some people who won't like you depending on what you do and your emotional behavior. Now, those people are the majority who will unconsciously react to how you feel about yourself. So, the only way to break the pattern, I don't like to say it this way, but it's the only real way I can think of saying it, is to break the pattern. You've got to do something consciously to change your behavior. Now, don't try and pick out which behavior to change. The Chinese have a saying that says, if you want to change your life, change 27 things in your house. So, which means feng shui can also heal a broken heart. Start changing how you think, changing how you think about yourself, how you think about the world, change how you dress, change, if you want to, change how you walk, change where you go, change who you hang out with. As you start making these changes, you're making internal changes that help break these old patterns. If you keep doing the same thing, thinking the same way, dressing the same way, going to the same places, that keeps reinforcing the old pattern. So somehow consciously you got to make a break. Yeah. It isn't easy. I'll tell you, right, it isn't easy. One of the other things that helps, remember I talked about the present moment approach? As much as possible, getting into the present moment is really, really helpful. And one of the easy ways to do that is to involve yourself in something that requires you to be in the present moment. Even if you don't feel like it. Of course, when you're starting to get depressed, which is part of an anger symptoms, you really don't feel like moving around and jumping and having playing. But wow, that gets you into the present moment. So some kind of sport, some kind of craft hobby that keeps you busy, not something that you can do while your mind wanders, something that requires your mind to be present as well. We don't have much opportunity for that here, but boy, I found skiing was one of those things. Surfing would be another, okay? You don't wander with your mind while you're surfing or skiing, okay? That just doesn't work. But there's so many other things that we can do that will help bring us into the present moment, and that can give us the peaceful moment where we consciously choose to break an old pattern. Okay? Anything else? Yes?
Is it ever a good idea, or is there any advantage to, say, you're hurt and taking, 5 minutes, an hour a day, a week, and just fully immersing yourself in that before you heal yourself?
Not necessarily. The only time that I would consider that would be a benefit, if you're doing it with somebody else's help, and they can guide you into relaxing the muscles that you feel tense while you're starting to immerse yourself in that. Doing it by yourself, you can get lost in the memory and in the feelings and not know how to get out. But doing it, it doesn't have to be a professional. Just somebody you can say, okay, there you are, this is happening. How do you feel now and where do you feel it? And then helping you relax that part of your body. That could be useful.
So that would be a good way to help somebody else who is not.
Sure. Okay. Not necessary, but for some people, it would help them feel like they're actually doing something to change how they feel, and that's necessary for some people. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's the problem with dynamite. Dynamite, it feels like you're not doing anything, and yet it's gone. Where'd that go? You know? But, so you have to use the one that works for you. Okay. Yes?
What about meditating?
Well, it depends on how you meditate. If you're using a simple form of meditation that simply relaxes the body, that's wonderful. Some meditations, that's what they do. if you're using a meditation, some people use meditation as an escape from what's going around, and that's not helpful. Because when you come back, there it is again. Okay? So it all depends on the type of meditation you do. Yeah. Some people can, meditation is where you have engaged focus. And where you get inspirations, maybe, and insights, maybe deep peace. That kind of meditation can be very beneficial. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
If you, I mean, I have a particular situation, but if you had like a tension that you knew was in your body, but you didn't know quite where it came from,
Yeah.
how would you go about finding the root cause?
Oh, that's a good question. If you have tension somewhere in your body and you don't know where it came from, how would you go about finding out the root cause? Well, in my tradition, we don't bother with the root cause. And I'll tell you why we don't bother with the root cause. It's an infinite universe. And the cause could be anything. There's no way to pinpoint it. What usually happens is people do searching or therapy or some kind of thing until they find a cause that satisfies them. Meanwhile, they could have gotten rid of the whole problem. Okay? The problem is there's tension. So relax the tension. Now, in the process of relaxing the tension, sometimes the only thing that happens is the tension goes away and the problem's gone. Sometimes the tension has been suppressing a memory. And you release the tension and a memory comes up. Now you have something to work with. But searching for a cause before you release the tension is a waste of time, in my opinion.